So, my good friend, what about these virtual disks? The files that we were looking at that were being used by Snap and our loop devices. Well, these could be ISO files, so files that we've downloaded from the internet, but we could also create and manage our own disk files. We're going to be investigating some of the tools that we can use to do this. But in the first instance, why don't we look at how we can mount an ISO file? So we're going to download a file from the internet. I'm not really bothered about the file that we're downloading, but I know this happens to be a relatively small file, so it makes great demonstration material. We can then go through and mount the ISO file, and we can mount it to a temporary directory /mnt. But we do need to be root to do this. We can then go through and check the ls mount directory. We can see our block devices, and we can also use the lo setup command as root to be able to print out a little bit more details. Once we're finished with it, we can use the umount command to unmount the mount directory. So come on, let's go through and make sure that we can work with our ISO files. So here we are back in our glorious Pixel playground. And the first thing I'm going to do is just take a look at this wget command. Now, I've already put the command in, but you can see that it begins with a hash, so it hasn't been executed. But you don't really want to see me typing this out. As I said, I'm not really interested in the file that we're downloading, more that this is about 38 meg, if I remember. Now let me use Control and A to move to the beginning of the line. And then I can go through and just delete the comment. So I can go through and download the file. If I look at ls-lh for then the file system is case sensitive. So I'm just doing an uppercase V and hitting the tab key. And then I'm able to see then that I've got the videos directory and the VBox guest edition. So if I now put B and tab, it will complete. And we can see then that this is a 36 meg file. Well, okay, that is well and good. We now know information about our file, but we want to use the file system. So we're going to use sudo and mount. We can specify the file. So I'm just using VB and tab. And then where we want to mount it to. We can put in our password. It gives me a little bit of a warning there that this is an ISO file, so it's not writable. But now if I go through and look inside of the mount directory, we've got all of those VirtualBox guest edition files. If I look at my block devices, so ls block, we can see then that I have a heap of block devices. But just take a look at loop 16 there. We can see that it is our loop device pointing through to the /mnt directory. But let's look at some of the tricks we've already learned. If I look at ls block and minus uppercase I can look for the major number, and this should be 7 for loop devices. So we're now only looking at our loop devices, and of course I can still see loop 16. But if I want to get even more tricky with this, I can go through and pipe the output through to tail, so we're looking at the end, but only show me the last line, -N1. So we've drilled down just to get the information for loop 16, showing how useful the command line can really be. To really drill down into this file, though, we have to use lo setup, which needs to be run as root. So I can use sudo lo setup, and when we look at the output, we can see that it's not sorted, but in the middle we have loop 16. But if I clear my screen and go back to lo setup, I can choose to look just at loop 16, so /dev/loop16. So we can see now more details, that we can see then it is loop 16, and we can see that it's pointing through to the ISO file. With our file system mounted, we can list the contents of the mount directory, and of course everything is there. But let's clear the screen and see what happens when we unmount the mount directory. Notice that it's umount, not unmount as the command. So now we've removed the connection from the ISO file to the directory, And when I look inside of the directory, we can see now the directory is empty.